Okay, good evening. This is the Ogden City Council Redevelopment Agency special meeting for Tuesday, October 1st, 2013. Let the roll call reflect that all board members are present. First is reports from the Planning Commission concerning the Ogden Bend Master Plan Amendment. Mr. Montgomery.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the item before you is a continuation with your RDA hat on of the petition that was described in the city council meeting. The second part of the petition asks that the master plan then be revised. And with the action of the Planning Commission, their recommendation, other amendments to the master plan also were required to be made. Before I get into the exact details, I just want to explain that as we had our work session a few weeks ago and talked about the different aspects of it, a different resolution was created from what the Planning Commission had recommended to you. And this resolution deals with amending page 2.11 of the Master Development Plan. What that page looks like is go back down here again. There's this page, and it'll focus in a minute. Maybe.
It always makes you think there's something wrong with your eyes.
I see it fine. Do you have a problem with that one? Or? Take it off of automatic and back on again.
Is it trying to focus on that taller?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So it is taking this chart on page 2.11 and adding into it now the small live work in the small apartment building. While we do that, that then also sets the setbacks and the types of units that they can be. So while the MU ordinance lists that, this chart will now also reflect that revision that you approved in the city council meeting. So that is the item that's before you tonight for consideration. Now, there was another item that was petitioned, and that regarded revising this drawing. We're recommending that that be continued so that your action tonight is only acting on the first page 2.11 and not making any action regarding this until further information is provided us, whether or not to make amendments to what was petitioned, these restricted building types in this area. So our discussion tonight is only focusing on the chart and not the map amendment. So based on your action at the City Council, we feel it would be appropriate to amend the building type chart to reflect the ordinance. And I think that's pretty straightforward from what we talked about earlier. I don't know if you have any questions about that. Now, in the Planning Commission recommendation, you'll see there's 3 people who voted against this amendment, and that, of course, is the second part that we talked about will be continued on until further information is provided us.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Montgomery? Okay.
If there's no further discussion. Oh, we need public input, don't we?
And Mr. Walker, you are the petitioner. Would you like to speak again? Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Then we will now receive input regarding the Ogden Bend Master Plan Amendment.
Seeing no movement, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we adopt proposed resolution 2013-18.
I second it.
We have a motion from Board Member Gochner to adopt proposed resolution 2013-18 and a second from Board Member Stevens. This is a roll call vote.
Board Member Stevens.
Aye.
Board Member Van Hoosier.
Aye.
Board Member Wicks.
Aye.
Board Member Gochner.
Aye.
Board Member Heyer.
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner.
Aye.
Chair Blair.
Aye, that passes. Next is consideration of adjourning into a closed executive session for the purpose of discussing the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. Mr. Williams.
Chair, a closed executive session is permissible for the limited purposes set forth in the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'd move that we move into a closed executive session.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn into a closed executive session from Board Member Heyer and a second from Vice Chair Garner. This is a roll call vote.
Board Member Van Hoosier. Aye. Board Member Wicks.
Aye.
Board Member Gochner.
Aye.
Board Member Heyer.
Aye.
Board Member Stevens.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gardner.
Aye.
Chair Blair.
We will now dismiss into a closed executive session, and then we'll come back and continue with the agenda. Okay, welcome back. We'll now have reports from the administration concerning the Union Square Land Transfer and Development Agreement with Lotus Residential Partners. Mr. Cooper.
Chair Blair, members of the board, good evening. Thank you for your time tonight, extended time. Before you is Resolution 2013-19, which authorizes the executive director to enter into a land transfer and development agreement with Lotus Residential Partners for a property located at 2550 Wall Avenue. It's a residential project being proposed on the property. I'd like to start by getting you oriented a little bit on that site. You're likely familiar with the area. To the top is 25th Street. And these units are Union Square Phase 1 townhomes that have existed, I believe, since 2004. So the property that we're talking about tonight are these two empty parcels. This one, which consists of, I believe, 12,000 square feet, 13,000 square feet, and this one consisting of 37. I believe those numbers are right. I'll double check here in a moment. But those two properties are the subject of the land transfer and development agreement. The developer has come to the city proposing a two-phased project. I'm not sure how to run. So again, to get you oriented, these buildings here are 25th Street, are on 25th Street. This is Wall Avenue here. So the first section of the proposed project would happen on the smaller piece that I just showed you. It would consist of 8 townhomes, which would be built similar to the existing townhomes that are there now. The existing townhomes are older. They're 10 or so years old. So the new townhomes being proposed would represent some of the same architectural features, but with an updated and fresh look. It would definitely be a phase 2 type of a look, newer materials, but all in all, it would maintain the same overall look and feel of the existing townhomes as to preserve some of the integrity that remains in that project. So that part of the proposed project would happen, if approved tonight, would happen in a couple of ways. The land transfer would occur actually after construction of the buildings and upon certificate of occupancy. In the packet that you received, there's a schedule plan. Let me grab it here. So again, if approved, the conveyance of that first parcel would happen at the occupancy of the completed new units, the 8 new units. And so Section A here represents what that timeline is likely to be. It's hoped that there would be an approval and ratification of the agreement in October. It shows no later than October 31st. The developer would immediately then submit for site plan approval and building permit approval, which would then lead to construction early next year and occupancy and closing on the land, which then the agency would convey the property at that time, sometime next summer. So that is how it's anticipated to happen for Section B. We've aggregated the purchase price in the agreement, so both parcels are included in the overall purchase price of $392,000. Closing would happen in two separate transactions. The first closing would be for that smaller parcel, and at that time, for conveyance of the property, the developer would make a payment of $1,000. Section B would then happen at a later date. The environmental conditions that exist on the site exist primarily on the larger parcel, which is Section B in the plan. And so there's still some work that needs to be done here in order for the city to receive a no further action letter from the DEQ. As owners of the property now, we're liable for that contamination and that cleanup. We've been working with the DEQ for over 18 months now on getting that contamination cleaned up. And as a condition of conveyance to the developer, the DEQ will be required to, or the city will be required to obtain from the DEQ a no further action letter. So it's anticipated that that will take some time. And in fact, this says December 13th. After talking with DEQ over the last couple of weeks, we're realizing that that's no longer possible based on some of the additional requirements that they're imposing on the property. So once we do receive that no further action letter, we anticipate it would be next year, sometime late. The developer would then have, I believe, a year to receive that property through conveyance, and then another 24 months to build on that property. The reason for that is, as we've spoken with the developer, we've been very clear as to what is happening in and around the city in terms of new product, especially apartments, that would potentially compete with this proposed project. So it's important for them to have a clear perspective of what the market conditions are once that property is clean and ready to be conveyed. And so we've built into the project, into the agreement, quite a bit of time for them to do their analysis and to look at current market conditions and really pinpoint what that area and what the market at that time needs. Once that transaction happens, once those conditions are met, it would happen as a second closing, as described in the agreement. And during that closing, the developer would pay $15,000 for the conveyance of the property. So the total purchase price for both pieces would be $392,000. Total payment from the developer would be $16,000. So the difference in the purchase price versus the payment would constitute the incentive from the board. The incentive is latent in the ground itself through the acquisition acquisition dollars that are sunk into the property and any cleanup that has occurred prior to conveyance. We figured that we have about $12,000 in cleanup costs now. We suspect, based on the new conditions that DEQ has imposed on us as of late, that we would incur another $6,000 to $7,000 in cleanup. So the $16,000 is payment from the developer during the two closings would be representative of reimbursement of sorts for the costs incurred by the board for the environmental cleanup. The difference in the purchase price versus the payment is meant to be an incentive to help write down some of the cost of acquisition. Even though we will be receiving a no further action letter from the DEQ, there still is the potential of contamination. The no further action letter is specific only to the work that we performed under the work plan. So if they get further into the property and they find additional contamination, then they at that point own the property, then that liability is theirs. And so because of that unforeseen liability, those situations typically devalue the property. So the incentive represents that type of a risk. It also represents a little bit of the market risk that still exists in this area. We all know that 25th Street is growing and becoming more vibrant every day and every year and every month. And it's our strategic goal to get more and more people living in and near 25th Street. But because of some of the conditions across the street on Wall and adjacent to this property, there still are some rent risk. And so our incentive is meant to help underwrite that. And by doing so, by creating a low-cost basis in the ground, the developers then able and willing to then build a more robust, more aesthetic project that would otherwise not be feasible had he had a large land basis under the current market rental cap. So we hope that through our incentive of the land conveyance and at the low cost that's represented in the agreement, that we'll be getting a very architecturally specific and quality project in that area. Aside from the incentive built into the land conveyance, there are being contemplated by the agency right now, so it's expected that the developer would obtain his own financing and get through the development of the project on his own with no additional incentive. So again, we're very excited for this proposal. We recommend the approval of Resolution 2013-19. And if so, then we would work diligently with the developer over the next few months to make sure that drawings and designs are held up to the standards that we hope for in this area. Any questions?
Brandon, I just have one question. If there's further remediation required before they take ownership, how will that be handled?
There is. So we've worked with DEQ. And
post that, if it happens before they actually take ownership of the land, have you?
Again, that's kind of built in the risk into the transaction, which leads to the incentive. So once we receive the no further action letter from DEQ and they take ownership of the land, they now own any future liabilities that might arise from the property. We know from historic analysis that there was an old gas station there. We've hit the tanks that we think existed for that gas station and some other tanks that were associated with some homes there. So we, aside from digging up the whole property, we're confident that we'll complete the work that we set out under the corrective action plan with the DEQ. If there's additional contamination found after the developer receives ownership of the property, then that liability will be theirs.
Brandon, as this development moves forward and they look at parking and site plans and all of that, that will go through the Planning Commission and we'll look at that future development as it comes into fruition.
Correct, yes. And again, based on what I've mentioned before, we'll see the townhomes sooner than later, and then as we look at how the contamination cleanup transpires and some of the market conditions, then we'll see the Section B at a later date.
So how many parking stalls do we have per unit there?
Well, the townhomes have a two-car garage built into them, and this, the parking for Section B is conceptual at this point, and so there really isn't a parking calculation. Typically, I would imagine that it would be difficult to rent an apartment building without at least a 1.2 to a 1.5 parking stall to unit ratio. From this conceptual drawing, all the parking is contained within the building because there isn't a whole lot of site parking other than what is proposed as a concept up there. So we'll work those things out with our planning staff and with the developer as we look at the constraints of the site, the flow, adjacent properties, things like that.
And I can't think of any housing that would be closer to our transportation hub.
True.
Just across the street.
Makes it very appealing for those urbanites who want to just walk to the train and maybe ride down to Salt Lake with Wi-Fi and their laptop to work. Very appealing. We'd like them to work here instead, but you can't always have everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Comments?
Okay, then I'll propose that we adopt Resolution 2013-19 for this land transfer and development agreement.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Vice Chair Garner to adopt proposed resolution 2013-19 and a second from Board Member Heyer. This is a roll call vote.
Board Member Wicks?
Aye.
Board Member Gochner?
Aye.
Board Member Heyer?
Aye.
Board Member Stevens?
Aye.
Board Member Van Hoosier?
Aye.
Vice Chair Garner?
Aye.
Chair Blair?
Aye, that passes. Next is public comments. This is an opportunity to address the board regarding your concerns or ideas for the Ogden Redevelopment Agency. City council concerns should be expressed during a city council meeting. Please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing no movement. Comments from the RDA Executive Director.
And tonight, thank you.
Comments from board members?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
We have a motion to adjourn from Board Member Gochner and a second from Board Member Wicks. This is a voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Okay.